Hello, everyone. I'm super delighted to be speaking with Alok Ajmera today, CEO of Prophix Software, on one of their latest reports called the 2023 Finance Leaders Survey, How Finance Leaders Can Spark Change. Hello, Alok. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me.
I am super excited because it's a really interesting report, and I know we have a couple of data points we're going to dive into. So first and foremost, something that is on top of everyone's mind: inflation, risk of recession, talent shortages. All of these are real challenges that organizations around the world are facing today. How do these external pressures impact finance teams and their priorities?
Yeah, pretty dramatically. The last several years have been exceptionally challenging for organizations and corporate finance groups, just managing with such a heavy dose of uncertainty. Obviously, a couple of years ago was pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on business. And today we're kind of mixed and dealing with this macroeconomic environment that has a cocktail of different issues. You mentioned them, whether it's inflation, interest rates, cash recession, supply chain issues, labor shortages. It's a bunch of complicated issues kind of converging that are impacting businesses. And corporate finance groups actually have such an important role to play with regards to the fiduciary responsibilities for those organizations. So figuring out how to manage all of these externalities, it can be incredibly challenging. And that's definitely on the top of minds of pretty much every CFO or financial leader that we've spoken to. And it definitely got highlighted in the survey that we did as well.
I can imagine. I mean, that's literally everything that we talk about on a very regular basis. Now, the other thing that's always on the headline is automation. Automation is essential for the future of finance. And according to your survey, 65% of finance leaders are planning to automate more than half of their processes by year end. That's pretty astounding. I want to ask you, how does automation drive strategic value for finance and the organization itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I answer, let me take a step back and talk about, areas of automation or why automation is even on the minds of finance leaders. If you think about many financial processes, whether it's closing the books at the end of the month or rolling out reports or doing forecasts or any of these activities, surprisingly, despite, all this development and technology, a lot of these processes are still very manual. They're heavy in Excel, they're people oriented, passing information back and forth, manually rolling up numbers, etc., which is obviously time consuming and error prone. And so if you think about where finance leaders are going, you mentioned the word strategic, how do you drive more strategic value? Well, interesting and obviously like looking backwards and doing the accounting and rolling up the numbers is obviously important and it needs to get done, but in itself doesn't actually add any strategic value. So looking at these processes and really figuring out how do you automate to shorten cycle time, how do you make them less intense from a labor perspective, really allows organizations to then take the high skilled talent that they have and actually orient them to things that might be more strategic in nature or more value creative.
I like that. I had to chuckle when you say we still do a lot of manual processes. I would raise my hand up. Now, we initially we talked about the macroeconomic environment. Now, to survive and thrive, finance teams need to be agile. And in fact, according to the survey, 96% of finance leaders agree that agility is essential. But what does it exactly mean for
Yeah.
finance leaders, and what are the challenges to increasing agility?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we start with talking about what does agility actually mean in the context of finance? You know, Typically when you think about agility in finance, it's the ability for finance leaders to actually understand what's happening in the macro, understand what's happening in the business, and actually support the business in making more rapid, real-time decisions. And again, so if I use the closing your books kind of analogy, if it's taking you, all the way into day 15, day 30 of the month to just close your books so that you can actually understand how you performed in the previous month, then you don't really have any time to respond to anything that has happened. And so the idea of agility is really for finance leaders through automation and technology, skills, infrastructure, etc., to spend less time on the manual pieces and then allow more, I don't want to say reaction, but the ability to help connect the dots between financial, non-financial information with the people in the business to drive smarter decision making. And I think that's really driving agility. And we saw that actually part of the survey when we talked to finance leaders and we said, hey, how many people have made progress on agility? How many leaders actually felt that they were more agile? It was almost 80+% of the leaders came back and said, look, over the last several years, they've actually feeling like their organizations are becoming more agile. And it's not surprising thinking about how many changes have actually happened, how much pressure from boards and CEOs are coming down into finance leaders, really around how do we reforecast, how do we understand changes, how do we dynamically take into consideration what's happening in the macro and make adjustments into the micro to help support thriving businesses, again, whether it's managing cash, whether managing profitability, margin, etc.
I like your point about connecting the dots. It's about data, and then what do we use the data for? And it plays straight into the next thing I want to ask you. Now, in the survey, automation and investment in tech were identified as top priorities for finance leaders, and rightly so. And there's clear momentum behind using AI and machine learning as predictive engines in the finance setting. But what role does AI have in finance right now, and how critical will it be to the future of finance? Because I want to know, how does smart technology support automation and agility? And if we are over reliant on AI, how would that potentially hinder the finance department?
These are wonderful questions, actually. Let me, there's a couple different things that you mentioned there. So let me kind of separate them and then make sure that at the end of my talk, you make sure I get to the key answers that you're looking for. Um, Look, at the end of the day, before I talk about the AI component, a lot of investment is actually going into place to help organizations streamline data. As we mentioned, connecting the dots. I think that's one of the biggest pieces, right? Whether you look at financial or non-financial data, we're getting inundated with information. But oftentimes there's no understanding of what's true or not true, even within all of these sets of information. So again, being able to take all this information, interpret it, understand it, connect to the right people in the organization is becoming more and more important for finance leaders. That's translating to more investment, which is surprising. Like if you think of most organizations, major investments in technology, cloud computing have gone into different functional areas. Although in a finance organization, oftentimes you find, an over reliance on technologies that might be 15, 25, 30 years old, which is shocking in today's world, right? Now, take the next step. You talk about AI and where AI fits in today, and then where AI might fit in tomorrow. So I think obviously right now, the last couple of months, like AI and generative AI and large learning models have become large language models have become really important in the context of how rapidly things are developing. There is no doubt in my mind that these are important tools that are fundamentally changing how people work today. It's difficult to say where these will go because they're changing so fast. I'll also comment and I'll caution everyone that we're also in the kind of pinnacle of hype cycle on these technologies. And so it's easy in this moment to see, the last several months and then project forward on a straight or an exponential line and say, okay, well, everything is going to fundamentally change. I just caution everyone to understand that it will change. We just don't know exactly how it's going to change yet. Back to your original question on where is AI today and is there an over reliance? Actually, AI is really immature in use cases for the Office of Finance today. So there are obvious use cases that need to be explored that most organizations aren't exploring yet. So in the context of, you have a lot of information. Well, one of the things that accountants and finance leaders are doing are, on a regular calendar basis, applying business logic to this information, looking for anomalies, looking for errors, looking for fraudulent transactions, etc. That's a very ripe use case for AI technologies to actually help not only augment and streamline the work, but actually do the work better. And so that's just one example, but there's so many that are useful today that organizations just aren't getting to because they're still relying on technologies that are maybe 20 plus years old.
I was going to say likely more than 20 years old, especially in banking. And I like your point about AI. You know, there's still a lot of potential that we could explore. I don't think we have quite scratched the surface just yet. Which, you know, that's where the fun part is, right? Is to explore new technology and where we can implement it. Before I let you go, I have one more thing I want to ask you. When it comes to finance leadership, every person, every individual has their own style and point of view, and rightly so, because we're all humans. But according to that survey, this is the interesting part. You generally see their approaches to digital transformation falling into just a few identifiable personas: visionary, innovator, and realist.
Mm.
I know where I fall, but curious to know from you, how are these approaches reflected in the purchase decisions for finance departments and the overall progress for finance digital transformation?
Yeah, great question. We did identify those three kind of archetypes. I will comment first of all. Usually leaders don't fall into only one of the buckets, right? Usually, you might actually have different flavors of each of them as a leader, and it's important to understand where your business is in its life cycle to determine which of the leaders are actually better suited for you. What's interesting is though we're finding a trend where the realist CFO, which is, hands-on, ensuring that the financials are strong, ensuring that, there's strong governance in the business, etc., which is the more traditional CFO role. We see a migration, if you will, of more and more CFOs moving down the spectrum towards innovator and then ultimately towards visionary. And I think that's corresponding with this trend around the needs of the business changing. It's not good enough just to have governance. If you go to the visionary spectrum of the CFO, that CFO is actually expected to be value creative. So they're working strategically with the board, with the CEO, oftentimes as the CEO's right hand in creating more enterprise value. So governance, although important, doesn't necessarily add incremental value. And so those visionary CEOs are really focused on value creation, which is leading them to have greater budgets, have a greater voice, and ultimately invest not only in technology, but in skills, in infrastructure, in team as well. So it's driving an increased investment appetite, which we're seeing again in the survey. I think something like 50% plus organizations actually said they're seeing increased investment in the Office of Finance, which is ultimately translating into investments again in technology, people, skills, etc.
And that's a wonderful way to end our conversation, as a positive note. And I think it hopefully will signal, more positive trends in the future. I know challenges comes opportunity for us to do something different and better. So thank you so much for joining me today, Alok.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful talking to you.
Same here. Thank you.